If Santa Claus says ho ho ho, what does Krampus say? Welcome back to Darkness Prevails. Today I've got some reasons for the season. 5 reasons to lock your doors and turn on all the lights throughout the holidays. These are 5 allegedly true and terrifying Christmas stories. I hope you all enjoyed this episode, and despite all the creeps and scares we do here, here's to having a holiday season that is safe and fun. Remember, if you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. The Shu Shu Whisp from Darren. During the Christmas holiday of 2017, I had to work. Considering I was in the middle of a bit of a family feud, I didn't have anyone to visit and therefore welcomed the idea of working for triple time pay instead. I worked for a national park service in the Midwest. No, I wasn't a ranger, I was more like a groundskeeper. My primary duties included picking up trash, maintaining decorative plants along pathways and walkways, cutting down dangerous trees or branches, etc. If the woods needed maintaining or cleaning up, it was my job. Now, the national park I worked at got particularly busy around holidays, but would always be empty on the holidays themselves. Basically, this meant trash would be at its highest point just before everyone left for home to spend time with their families. That year was no exception, and as I walked outside alone into a light flurry that evening, I began my hours-long onslaught of picking up other people's refuse. I started at 2 p.m., and by 5:05 p.m., it was dark out. By then, I'd finally cleaned up the primary walkways around the souvenir shop and the visitor hub. I packed in my tools and headed back to the employee building as the wind picked up. I couldn't help but be reminded of how bizarre it was that that time of year it would be pitch black by 5. The early dark was a bit creepier than normal darkness, if you asked me. I jumped when my phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket and read the caller ID. It was my boss. I cleared my throat and swiped the green icon, then spoke. Hello? I winced when I realized how tired I sounded. Darren, it's Bev. We're gonna need a tree cut down along the hiking trail leading into the northeast campgrounds. Thing's about to fall down. Don't want it to crush any visitors. Nope, I agreed. Inwardly, I was a little irritated. Depending on the thickness of the tree, it could be a monumental task, and I was scheduled to clock out by 8 p.m. Hey, I had nowhere to go that day, sure, but I didn't want to work all night in the freezing cold dark cutting down some tree alone. Get that done ASAP. Probably no campers tonight, but I don't want to risk it. Good night, and Merry Christmas. She then hung up. I tucked my phone back in my pocket and entered the employee building, putting back my wool gloves and a box of extra trash bags, exchanging them for heavy-duty rubber gloves, some orange tape, and the biggest saw I could find. Then I took off on the walkway leading to the campgrounds. The campgrounds were northeast of the building and lie deep in the woods, so the walk took me about 15 or 20 minutes. Once there, the hiking trail starts at the east of the campgrounds. This was another 10 minutes of walking. At first, I wasn't sure there was actually a dead tree on the trail. My boss may have been wrong about where it was located, but eventually I found it, an old pine tree decrepit and crumbling. It was no longer that healthy woods brown color, instead the trunk was gray. Yep, looked like this thing could fall at any time. And unfortunately for me, the sucker was about 44 inches around, pretty thick for something I was going to have to cut down by hand. With a sigh, I began to tape off the trail so that no one could hike beyond that point. I would be angling the tree to fall onto the trail itself, as that was the direction it was hanging anyway. In fact, having it fall in any other direction would have been difficult or impossible. I took out my saw and got to work. But first I laid the lantern down about 10 yards away or so, pointing at me. Those things were extremely bright, so it had to be pretty far back or it would have blinded me. As I saw it at the trunk of the tree, I was quickly getting winded. And speaking of wind, it was picking up even more, making the tree strain a bit. Wouldn't it be nice, I thought, if the dang thing just snapped and got it over with? I sat down for a while after sawing for about half an hour. I was already sore, not to mention I hadn't seen hide nor hair of another person since noon, so I was sure no one would be venturing through here. I was taking a break, sipping on a tin of coffee that had already gone cold. Gross, but it kept me energized. As I screwed the cap back on the coffee tin, I froze and my eyes widened. A strange sound blew along the air, coming from further up the trail. I wanted to encourage myself that it was just the wind, nothing to worry about. But this didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a moan, long-winded and deep, coming from some sort of animal. Because I'd be damned if that sound was coming from a human being. Shoo. Shoo. What the heck was it? I'd worked in the woods for a few years now, and I'd never heard a sound like that. And as the sound grew louder, the wind itself seemed to grow stronger. The trees around me were bending and creaking, slapping against each other and straining under their own weight. Shoo. Shoo. It continued. As confused as I was, my interest was beyond piqued. I was curious and was not ready to go back to sawing that tree. So I picked up my lantern, pointed it up the trail, ducked under the tape, and began to walk along the path. With each step I took, each turn that I rounded, the shoo-shoo sound swelled. I walked for about 100 yards up that trail, until the shoo-shoo sound stopped and the wind died down completely. It was quite disturbing when the wind stopped in a split moment, causing the strained and bending trees to stand upright again, all at once, all around me, as if they had become conscious and aware of me. I stopped as well, but not because of the wind and noise dying down, but because of the tree that stood in the middle of the trail. Right dang in the middle of it, a thin and frail tree. This freaked me out. If this tree had been here before, I would have heard about it. I would have been made to cut it down ages ago. I took a step forward and shuddered, because I swear I saw the tree shake. Another step forward, and I heard a single shoo. I swallowed hard. That sound, I was certain it was coming from that tree. With another step, my lantern better illuminated its form. What I thought was a tree trunk suddenly lifted itself off the ground and joined another stump-looking form. These two things weren't stumps at all. They were legs, tall, extremely thin, and covered in ridges that resembled bark. I couldn't breathe, but I managed to lift the lantern and angle it upwards, revealing more of this non-tree creature. Its entire body was covered in these fake bark ridges. It was a gray-brown color. It had 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and a neck that went up and crooked back down like an oblong checkmark. Every single inch of the creature, appendages, neck, head, and body alike, they were all the same thickness and were entirely featureless, like some sort of 7-inch thick stick figure made of wood. Shoo. Shoo. The sound protruded from what I thought was the top of its wooden, featureless head. I watched this massively tall thing take way too slow steps and disappeared into the woods to my right. As soon as its steps became a distant echo, I tripped, gathered myself, and ran for my life, panting like an idiot. I ran past the tape and made for my car back at the employee building. I drove home, letting Bev, my boss, know that I wasn't able to take the tree down by hand and would need some help with it. I didn't tell her that I went home early. I was planning on telling her that I just forgot to clock out that night. I worked there for another year or so, then transferred to a different park where I've yet to encounter anything sinister or unexplained. I like it that way. Normal. Normal is good and boring and exactly how I want it. Screw that thing I saw. Made me question everything. Made no sense at all. I wasn't ever able to bring myself to tell my friends this story. I mean, had I seen Bigfoot or a ghost, I would have told them in a heartbeat. Those are far more believable. As for that tree creature thing, I don't want to see it again, even if it's not dangerous. But who knows? They're still here. From Aria Yager. It was around Christmas of 2009, maybe 2010. On Christmas Day, some family was having a little get-together. My great-uncle David had bought a new house. This house was an hour and a half from our old house. He decided that year he would host the party, so as to show off his newly acquired home, as well as his new wife. So we made the long ride there on somewhat clear roads. But when we got to the house, it looked normal. Just a cozy little place out in the woods with a very serene view. We went inside and were greeted with the sickly sweet family holiday greeting. A few of my cousins were there as well. My younger brother and myself said hi, making friendly chatter with our cousins, not long after deciding to play hide and seek downstairs with them. Before we went off, Great Uncle David warned us to be careful around the new unfinished portion of the place. Of course, we agreed. When we went down the carpeted stairs to the almost fully finished basement, we looked around, admiring the place. Half of it was carpeted. There was a sliding glass door leading outside to the backyard. The walls were painted. It had a nice stone fireplace. Basically, the works. Now, because the place wasn't entirely finished, there was some sealed plastic on the sliding glass door and on any other cracked areas. This kept out cold air and particles, sealing the warmth inside. The first half was warm and cozy, but the other half was just bare concrete, wood, and insulation. The hall looked like a skeleton, with a bare wood frame. Obviously, they meant to put in a bathroom, because there was a toilet in one of the square room frames that wasn't hooked up yet. At the end of the hallway was a heavy oak door, and on the other side was a large desk and chair. Despite the door, we could see past it. There were no walls on either side of it. It was just a wood frame and a door in its place. It was more of an aesthetic divider for the time being. One of my cousins decides to be it, so as she turned and counted, we all went to hide throughout the basement. The other cousin hid somewhere behind the sectional couch. My brother hid behind the toilet, a bad choice. As for me, I went in between the wood framing, hiding under the large desk in the room at the end of the hall. Then my cousin who was it announced the phrase, "Ready or not, here I come," initiating the search and chase portion of the game. It didn't take long for her to find the other cousin. Then after 3 more minutes, they found my brother. But as they continued to look around, they were having trouble finding me. We had a rule with our game. We weren't allowed to tell the seeker where the other people were hiding if we were found. So my cousin who was it deducted aloud that she didn't hear the door close, so I couldn't be by the desk. But before they could go upstairs to search for me, I revealed myself. They came over into the room I was in, and we checked out the desk anyway. I asked her if David bought it, to which my cousin said no. She then told us that she heard David already talking to my grandpa about it. Apparently, they bought the house real cheap, and it even came with a lot of leftover furniture that was left behind by the previous owner. They sold most of the stuff, but kept this desk because it was very nice. Mahogany desks are quite good looking, I think. All the renovation that was going on downstairs was already started, but David and his wife planned to finish it. Either way, it was cool, and we decided to move on upstairs to play some video games, accidentally leaving the door open. As we neared the end of the wood frame hall, we all suddenly felt freezing cold. As I mentioned before, the room was toasty and sealed deliberately. There was no way it should be this cold in here. The hair on my arms and neck stood on end, and I felt as if someone was watching me. My girl cousin turned around, and after a moment of pause, she told us to look behind us. We turned back to the door. Remember what I said about that door. The door was only a doorway, so you could see beyond it from either side. Well, as we looked back at the door, it somehow began to slowly move on its own. It moved a good few inches before it stopped. I remember looking back at my brother and then back to the door. That's when the door swung shut and slammed so hard it shook the frame, nearly breaking it. I nearly jumped out of my skin as all of us booked it back upstairs. When we made it upstairs, everyone was staring. Our parents asked us what was wrong and why we were slamming doors. My girl cousin was crying and tried to explain what happened. That's when I simply said that the door slammed on its own, that we were in the hall and watched it ourselves. David and his wife looked worried, then pulled our parents aside. While the four of us tried to listen to David's older brother telling us funny jokes, he seemed to be trying to comfort and distract us. But I was watching our parents talk with David. I saw my girl cousin's mom looking shocked and put a hand over her mouth like she just witnessed an accident. That cousin and I discussed that it was probably bad if she reacted like that. After that experience, time went on. We all tried to forget about the odd experience. But on another occasion, while we were in the car, my grandpa looked in the rearview mirror at my brother and I. Seemingly out of nowhere, he asked us if we wanted to know what he, my girl cousin's parents, and David discussed that night. Immediately reminded of the event, I quickly nodded, and what he said was this. The reason why David and his wife got the house was because they could not afford their old one. When they found this house in the market, it was a steal. They bought it from the bank because the owner had killed himself in it. He hung himself in the basement, right in that very room above the desk. A couple of years after this, we found out that David and his wife sold the house, leaving that desk behind. Turns out they too had some very weird experiences there and were terrified. They bought themselves a small shack in the country, and they were doing fine for a while. All in all, I guess it pays to do some research about the place you're gonna buy before you get stuck in some sort of haunted nightmare. Never take things from old houses. From Pawpaw. The house that my dad and his sisters grew up in stood in the center of a very large property, and it was owned by his parents and their parents before him. The house was big and old. Even the furniture that came with the place was old, but it was beautiful Victorian-style furniture. I remember the place vividly. My brother and I grew up in it. We would spend Christmas holidays with Dad's family every winter. I only have fond memories of the place. There was this one bed in my parents' room that was huge and gorgeous. It had these elaborate carvings in the wood and mirrors along the headrest with drawers on each side. Just by looking at it, you could tell the bed was ancient. So after my dad's parents passed away, the property underwent many years of dispute between my dad and his relatives. As a result, it was uninhabited for many years. One year around Christmas, my cousin had newly constructed her house not far from the property. She asked my dad's sister if she could borrow the bed for some time while she waited for her new bed to arrive. My aunt agreed, and my cousin took the bed to her place. That night, while she lay in the bed, trying to fall asleep, she heard a knock, knock sound, which woke her up. A few moments later, there it was again. At first, she thought that it might have been a rat or some bugs chewing on the bed frame, so she didn't really react to it. When the knocking came around again, this time more fierce, she was so frightened that she ran out of the room and called her father. Her father came over to the house to give her company, as it was just my cousin in her new home at the time. Her father said that he would spend the night with her, and that she didn't have to be scared anymore. They both went to sleep on that same bed, but the knocking came again not too long after. It was very loud and aggressive. Both my cousin and her dad were so scared. They left the house and only returned in the morning, quickly taking that bed out and bringing it back to the old home. My aunt shared this story with me, telling me that furniture and other things do not like to be separated from old homes, so it's best to just not disturb them. My ex-stepdad's house, from Anonymous. Back in my hometown when I lived with my ex-stepdad, he and my mom were still married back then. I believe the house we lived in was built on land that was once a quarantine zone, as we had a lot of experiences of the paranormal variety there. These occurrences included anything from shadow figures to whispering, and even things being moved from where you put them. This is a compilation of the experiences my family and I have had that we could recall. One day, my mom was taking a nap in her king-sized bed. This was about 4 or so feet off the ground and fairly difficult for any small person to climb up on. She woke up when she felt something moving around at the foot of the bed. She told me that it felt like a small child or an animal trying to crawl up into the bed. There were no small children in the house at the time, and the only animals we had were a toy poodle that was too old to jump and a teacup Maltese puppy, both of which were also too small to jump up there onto the bed without human assistance. On another occasion, my sister had been sitting on one of the couches in the living room while I was still sleeping in my room down an L-shaped hallway. She said that she saw something white and about the height of our mother walking from my mom and stepdad's room down the hallway before turning the corner and walking down to the end of the hall. She turned her head just as the figure turned the corner, so she didn't get a great look at it. She shrugged and assumed our mom was going to check on me after taking a shower and putting on a white robe, but maybe a minute after that, our mother actually came through the kitchen door opposite the hallway, so that couldn't have been her. Something happened to my stepdad one Christmas. He had been getting out the Christmas decorations and was climbing up a ladder to get to the roof. When he looked up, he saw a white winged figure sitting on top of the house. When he looked directly at it, it looked over at him for a moment, before disappearing in a splash of light. Around the same time one night, I was reading a book and ended up falling asleep deeply. After maybe a few minutes though, I woke up to find my bed shaking violently side to side. When I told my mom the next day, she said that it may have been a small earthquake. But when it happened, I looked at my dresser and saw that the only thing that was moving in my room was my bed. I believe this may have something to do with my sister's experience. You see, my sister used to dream of this pair of twin children, about 10 or 11 years old in age. This was pretty coincidental considering my sister and I are twins too. In her dreams, these twins appear with bright red hair and were always wearing the same clothes. The girl would be wearing a little dress and the boy wore overalls with a frog or toad in the pocket. In her dreams, the boy would always be hiding and the girl would keep trying to get my sister to find him. These are really the most notable experiences we've had. We would also hear static and whispers at night, as if a TV was on in another room, only to see that everything was off for the night the next morning. Not to mention small objects would go missing for a while, only to be found where we'd already searched for them. Things went bump in the night, and I got used to them. The Glowing White Eyes, from Anonymous. I truly do believe in the paranormal. I believe my house is haunted, and that there are other beings on this earth. This is why I'm not too scared when weird things go down. I've come to terms with it now, especially after seeing and feeling strange things in the middle of the night. One Christmas, I'd been trying to find my Christmas stocking that I'd had since I was 6 years old. Not even thinking about it, I ran my fingers through my hair, and I instantly noticed that I felt rather greasy. So I went to my older sister's bathroom, getting ready to have a bath and wash my hair. I was listening to music and turning on the hot water when I heard a faint tapping sound. I listened for a moment, but then passed it off as the pipes shifting in the walls from the heat of the water. Then it happened again. I then looked over to the window and saw 2 white glowing spots outside the bathroom window. Immediately, my blood ran cold. I called out to my sister to check that she was still there. "What do you want?" I heard her grumpy voice shout. She hadn't left her room yet. I looked back to the window and the eyes were still staring. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Those eyes seemed to blink as well. What did they belong to, I wondered. The more I stared at them, the more details I made out. I could see the top of the thing's head and the faint outline of a smile. Suddenly, as I was about to give in and run out of the bathroom, the security light in my neighbor's driveway turned on, and I saw the head of the beast turn away. I heard a scraping of plastic, as if it was sliding down the drain pipe. I got out of the bath and I went to my bedroom. I then went downstairs and acted normal. I've used that bathroom plenty of times prior, but never saw any eyes. There was no way that what I saw was simply light from the bathroom or a reflection. There was definitely something outside my sister's bedroom, something watching and moving around through the window that night. I've even dreamt about it before, had nightmares of its wrinkly skin, deep sunken eyes, and yellow teeth. I've no idea what it is. I hate the thought of this thing watching me. There's no telling what it wants. But to say the very least, I am never, ever using my sister's bathroom again. I'm just not gonna risk it. Well, I hope these Christmas-time stories satisfy your hankering for something scary. I'll be back soon with yet more creepy tales of spooky goodness, and hopefully some hot cocoa and beef jerky. Just love to dip that meat into that hot cocoa. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want your story narrated, first you gotta send it to us at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below. There's a link to my Patreon where you can donate, and a link to my merch store where you can get some shirts. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, titled 5 Scary Stories That Would Scare Cthulhu. Kojo3 Official says, breaking news, Cthulhu actually a chill dude, says he's spooked. Awesome. If I could, I'd love to ask Cthulhu what his favorite scary stories are. Maybe both of us prefer werewolves. Finn Bauer says, time to fall asleep to another scary story. Can't wait to wake up in the morning to find my earphones choking me. Love your content, Darkness. Keep up the great work. Hey, Finn, I'm not happy unless something's choking me when I wake up. You know me. Brandon A says, I've been worried about you. Glad to hear you again. Why are you worried? I've only been gone a day, I think. I appreciate the love, though. A R-word says, the title somewhat makes me want to headbang some concrete. Good, cause that's what I was going for. But I'm not gonna pay the hospital bills, sorry. And Ryder Walton says, any new merch? That's a good question. I've been slacking in everything, especially merch. But maybe when some energy returns to me, I'll start making some more. I just don't feel myself these days, but I'll try my best. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are on the way soon. So stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing, super cool patrons. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.